Okay, so over the years I've been making things. It's my thing. I love making things out of wood. So I've made many things. For instance, that clock up there. That's wild olive. It's simply a little cheap movement that you put behind. I had to make a hole in the back of the thing and then polish up the front. So that's an example of the kinds of things I did when I was a bit younger. And for many years I've been thinking about making a chess set. And convinced myself that I don't think it could be done, certainly by me. And so I never did it. And then a couple of years ago, on a whim, I thought, what the hell, let's make a chess set. And it wasn't nearly as difficult as I thought. And so here is a chess set that I've made. At the time I wasn't going to make the board. And when I finally finished all the pieces, I thought, what the hell, let's make a board as well. So what we have here is, it's clearly a homemade set. I mean, it's not going to win any awards, but it's clearly a chess set as well. So what I employed here when I'm making this chess set, and it's something you use whenever you're making anything where there's going to be a need for repetition. Now in a chess set, you've got 16 pawns altogether, and you've got, let's see, you've got 6 nobles. 6 nobles, that's 12 nobles, you know, your castle, your bishop and your knight, and then you've got your 4 royals, and they're different heights, so you've got 2 queens and 2 kings. So that's immediately how you break it up. You immediately got to work out what is common amongst the things you're making. So let's start with the 16 pawns. It seems the most things you have to make, so let's do that. So all I did was, well, first of all I chose wood, and what I used was dowel. I used rather big dowel. That's 30 mils. So 30 mil dowel, rather nice Meranti, very strong, very hard. Now, apart from the 16 pawns, everything must have something in common. So let's take the bishop for some reason is not where, oh well, anyway, I don't know where the castle is, but it should be there. So we have a bishop, and here we have a pawn. If you put them together, you'll notice that the pedestal is the same. So that's the first thing I did, is I chose all the pieces I needed, and I cut my 16 pawns in terms of a length, and then I cut my 12 nobles in terms of length, their length, the 2 queens in terms of its length, and then the kings in terms of their length. But then I took each and every one of them and ran them through the saw to create this little pedestal, this line around the base, and they all got it. So that's your first step. So now you've got your 16 pawns in terms of length, and then it's a matter of actually decorating. What I did was I simply beveled the edges at the top using a sander, which created something of an effect. And I did that 16 times, and I have my 16 pawns. And then you've got to focus. So we know we've got 4 bishops. And so we have the height. The height is exactly the same as the knights and exactly the same as the castle. But now what does make a bishop? So it's a mitre. So I made a mitre. So with the 4, now you can have a look on the opposite sides of the board. It's absolutely very similar. Mind you, I think these are feeling of them. Is this the lighter one?
Yep.
And this is the darker one? Good.
Yep.
So here we go. As you can see, it's identical. All right. It wasn't good enough. I wanted to make a little bit more to show it as a bishop, so I carved a little cross in the front, so there was absolutely no doubt as to what piece this was. And you did that 4 times. So you never do one in completion. What you do is you do the little bits. So you do the pedestal first, then you do the pedestal, and you do it 4 times. Then you cut the mitre, then you cut the mitre, then you cut the mitre, then you cut the mitre. You don't finish one ever. And so it grows, and so everyone will resemble the other because you're making them almost simultaneously. You're not making them one after the other. And that's a big lesson that I needed to teach myself, and I suspect I've had to learn the hard way. And so the whole chess set eventually it makes itself after a while when you're making pieces. I mean, it took me a while. This thing took me nearly 6 months to make because there's an awful lot of things to do. But it's not rocket science. And then came the boards time. If you can feel, I'm not sure if the camera will pick it up, but you'll notice that now you help me here, I can't see. Are these the lighter colours?
You've got your finger on the lighter colour.
That's lighter?
Yes.
And that's darker?
That's right.
Alright, so I'm not sure if the camera can see, but if you look at a lower angle, you'll probably notice that they're textured. So the darker one is higher than the lighter one. Does the camera pick that up?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Right, so that means it's a tactile board. And I made that at the last minute. I wasn't going to, and then some blind chess player I knew pointed out that they used a tactile board, and I thought, oh, let's make one of those. And so I literally did it, and it wasn't particularly difficult. I ran the lighter ones through a sander, all the same wood, by the way. The lighter ones through a sander, and the darker ones I didn't. I put through much of a sanding, and I just made sure that the lighter ones were at least 2 or 3 mils lower than these. And then it was literally a matter of lining them up. First of all, I had to cut them, obviously, each square. That's where my saw comes in handy. I set up a jig so it was absolutely unnegotiable. So every single cut made an accurate square. I didn't have to re-measure every time because I had a jig in place. And so making the 64 squares was really not a big deal at all. And then it simply was a matter of gluing them down and making a surround. And then one chess set. So a lot of it is using systems, and you're using your brain rather than your hands when you're making anything. Now, particularly if you're prepared to make things in stages almost simultaneously, as I explained, that is absolutely not difficult at all. So let me go and take you to something else that I made more recently. I made that about 4 years ago. Last year, in 2013, I made this table, and I've always wanted to make a smart table for outside, and I went to a lot of trouble sourcing the wood, and I always wanted to make a table. Actually, what inspired me was I wanted to make a table with a marble inlay. So I have a table there, and these are Rhodesian teak, this is Meranti, and this is mahogany, African mahogany. And so in this particular table I employed a thing that I'm actually known for some reason. I have a particular style when I make, even the chessboard has it. Even the chessboard has it. I have a peculiar habit of, if you can look here, you'll see this piece of wood stops there, then this one starts from there, goes all the way to the end, that one starts from there, goes to there. So it's almost like a spiral. And I've done this with many things that I've made, and that chessboard is surrounded by it in exactly the same style. And if you look at this, I'll use exactly the same technique. Exactly the same technique. This piece of wood stops there at the end, this one starts from there, and so-called. So it becomes a spiral. And there's 2 pieces of wood employed here. And when I made this, obviously I was left with a hole in the middle, which I had to shape precisely to take a little piece of marble that I happen to have. This is actually not marble, this is travertine, but I mean it's as good as marble. And this is what passes for marble these days. And then it was just a matter of sanding. There's rather an amusing story. When I was sourcing the wood for this, I went to a place that sells exotic woods, and when I got this Rhodesian teak, it was such a lovely piece of wood. And I'm used to doing my own sawing. And I thought, for some reason, I would treat myself. And I said to them, you know what, can you cut the legs for me? I just thought it would save me another job to do. I could have easily done it myself, but I thought, they've got beautiful big saws. They're bound to be really accurate. So he said, sure. And I said, how big do you want them? And I said, I want the legs exactly 510 mils long. And I just bought this large piece of wood. In fact, there were 2 pieces of wood. And he said, sure. And he took them away, and he gave them back to me, and on the counter, as I felt them when he handed them to me, I could feel they weren't accurate. There was absolutely no question they weren't accurate. I could actually, with my hands, I could feel it. So I put them up on the counter, and every single one was different. Every single one was different. One was different by about 1.5 mils. The others, there was one that was different by at least 3 mils. And I looked at the guy and I said, what, are you blind or something? How come you can't cut a decent? I said 510. So I had no choice but to take it home and to cut it myself and to make sure it was accurate. And I can guarantee you these things are all 510. Trouble is they're not, because the lowest one he cut was 509. He had undercut the damn thing, so I had to change my design slightly. So I had to cut every one of them. But because I can work with jigs and because I'm very accurate, and thanks to that tape measure, I was able. So I thought it was rather an amusing story that he didn't, in fact, cut them accurately, and I had thought that, being a professional guy, that he would. So once again, with a table like this, you're going to be using that whole system of, oh yes, you can see here, I'm using a system of spirals. You'll see this leg faces here, and this leg faces me. So if you look at it from the edge, here's an edge of a wood, and here's the front of the wood. So every leg, so it's also it follows the whole spiral technique or style that I've employed here. I like it. Most people aren't quite sure what to make of it. I think on first glance I think I made an error, but I can tell you it isn't. Another thing I made many years ago, I made this 20 years ago, is that bench. I was lucky enough to have some wonderful old teak, some Burmese teak, came from a farm in the Cederberg. This is coming loose, 20 years. And so I had them my dad had them for about 30 years, and then I gave them to me, and I had them for about 20 years, and they'd been in the farm for about 100. So what you're looking at is probably a 150-year-old Burmese teak. And they were bigger, they were 4 meters long, several of them. And so I decided to make a bench out of them. And I wanted to make a bench that has no bolts. I like joining. I like things that join without any kind of attachment. This table, for instance, has absolutely no metal. There's not a single piece of metal in this table. Every single joint is doweled. I like joining, where you don't have screws and nails and things. So this bench, although this has screws because these slats are screwed on, the bench itself has no screws. They're all doweled. But what impressed me about this is when I made it, as I said, 150-year-old wood minimum, and as I cut it, my saw was wet with the oil of the teak. And that's the thing about Burmese teak, is that it remains oily, which is why it doesn't rot. And so this bench will outlive me and my children and my children's children. Now this stuff probably won't last, but this certainly will. So I'm very proud of this bench, actually, because this was the first really robust piece of furniture that I made 20 years ago.